All right, so I want to tell you about something that has genuinely been living in the back of my brain for a while now. And I want to be upfront about something before I get into it. This isn't some campfire ghost story. This is documented. This is in the Ohio Department of Transportation log from 1984, an official government record. And what it describes is one of the strangest things I've ever come across because there's no explanation for it, not a real one, not one that actually holds up when you look at all the details together. January 23rd, 1983, Sylvania, Ohio. There's a freight train running a completely routine route, a local flatbed hopper car hauling gravel from a quarry. Nothing unusual about it. It's one of those trains that runs the same route every single night, same schedule, same crew, probably half asleep by the time they hit the third or fourth stop. And then at 11:38 p.m., the train stopped. Not because of a signal, not because of mechanical failure, not because dispatch gave an order, it just stops. And the ODOT log says word for word, unexplained stop at milepost 7.6 on Route 205 between Sylvania and Zanesville. Engine stopped abruptly at 11:38 p.m., no signal received, no radio contact, no orders given. Train crew reported no warning signs, engine temperature normal, brakes functional, no operational cause. That's the phrase, no operational cause. Think about that for a second. Everything on that train was working perfectly, nothing broke. The machine did not fail. It just decided for reasons that no engineer, no technician, no government investigator could explain to stop. But here's the thing that makes it even stranger. Before the stop, the train had already done something it had no business doing. It had veered off the main line, not on any map, not on any schedule, and started moving slowly down a dead branch track that had been decommissioned since 1968, 15 years out of service, rusted rails, nothing out there. And the crew didn't even know. The engineer said he saw no signals, no turnouts, no lights indicating a track change, just fog rolling off the flatlands like cold breath. He had no idea he was on the wrong track until the train stopped, and they looked around and realized nothing out there looked familiar. So now you've got a train that wandered off its route in the middle of the night onto a track that hasn't been used in 15 years. And then at 11:38 p.m., the engine cuts out completely, power gone, lights gone, horn gone, radio gone, all wheels locked. Everything just shuts down at once like someone pulled a master switch, and the crew just sat there, staring at empty, rusted tracks in the dark. No panic, just this strange collective stillness. Dispatch tried to reach them for 12 minutes of total silence on the line. And when the patrol car finally showed up, the train was right there, perfectly still, not derailed, not damaged, sitting in the middle of nowhere on a track that wasn't supposed to exist anymore, like it had just decided to take a rest. Now, the detail that really gets me, and this is so easy to overlook, is the temperature drop. Between 11:30 and 11:42 p.m., the temperature dropped exactly 3 degrees. No storm forecasted, no weather event, just cold air moving through the valley, according to the crew. They noted it like it was nothing, but when you pair it with everything else that happened in those 12 minutes, it stops feeling like nothing. It starts feeling like something shifted, something in the air changed, and the train responded to it. And here's the thing, I keep coming back to this train ran that same route every single night, same schedule, same path, same everything. And then on this one night in January of 1983, it goes down a decommissioned track that no one authorized, stops cold with no mechanical cause, sits silent for 12 minutes, and then the very next day, the same train runs the same route with 0 incidents. Nothing in the log for that next shift, just this one quiet anomaly floating in the official record, 12 minutes of unexplained silence in the middle of Ohio on a winter night. The report doesn't call it a ghost. It doesn't say anything dramatic. It just uses the language that bureaucrats use when something happens that they cannot explain and do not want to dignify with speculation. Non-routine stop, no operational cause, filed and forgotten. But the thing about official language like that is that it tells you exactly as much as something more colorful would. If you know how to read it, no operational cause means the machine was fine, the conditions were normal, and something happened anyway, and no one knows what. I think about the engineer sitting in the dark on that dead track, not panicking, just sitting, maybe looking out the window at the fog over the fields. And at some point, realizing that whatever just happened wasn't in any manual he'd ever read. There was no procedure for this, no checkbox. He just sat there until the patrol car came, and then, I imagine, tried to explain something that he didn't have words for. The next morning, the train was found in that exact spot. Tracks clean, no oil stains, no damage to anything, just iron on iron, cold and still, like it had been parked there on purpose. That's the part that really does something to me, the stillness of it. Not destruction, not disaster, just this quiet pause in the middle of everything that, as far as anyone can tell, meant nothing and yet clearly meant something, because you don't forget 12 minutes of darkness on an abandoned track. you don't forget that the machine worked perfectly and still didn't go where it was supposed to go. That feeling doesn't leave you, and I think about those towns in Ohio, the ones that barely exist anymore, the old rail lines winding through the cornfields like forgotten veins, and I think about all the things that must have happened out there that never made it into any record at all. As this one did, and it still has no answer. You know what gets me about a story like that? It's not the train, it's the system around the train. The fact that something so obviously strange got filed away as no operational cause and nobody pushed further. Nobody asked more questions. And that happens all the time, not just with trains, not just with machines. It happens with places too, with addresses, with buildings that exist in the physical world but have been completely erased from every official record that's supposed to track them. And I found one in New Haven, Connecticut, and it is one of the most quietly unsettling things I've ever looked into. So I want to talk about something that is not a ghost story and not a conspiracy theory, but is somehow more unsettling than either of those things, because it's about how the systems we build to track reality property, records, tax rolls, city databases can just quietly stop seeing something. And when that happens, a place that physically exists can essentially disappear, not from the world, just from the record. And those two things, it turns out, are very different. 2147 South Street, New Haven, Connecticut, 1976. There's a house there, an actual physical two-story building with red shutters and a broken window on the left side. There's even a photograph of it from 1974 taken by a local paper. You can see the grass growing through cracks in the sidewalk. You can see the mailbox that someone had painted over the building was real. You could walk up to it and put your hand on the wall, but in every official record that was supposed to be tracking it, nothing, no owner, no tenant, no record of occupancy, not on the property tax rolls, not in the city's housing registry, not in the public records, just a gap where this building was supposed to be. I went through the New Haven Post archives and found the original story from June of 1976, and the language in it is incredible because it's so matter of fact about something that should have been impossible. It said residents were noticing this house, this actual structure on an actual street, had no listing anywhere. And not just the owner moved and didn't update the address. It wasn't listed at all. The city clerk's office had exactly one record tied to it, a filing under unclaimed property, dated March of 1974, that said just this: address 247 South Street remains unassigned. No reason, no follow-up. No explanation for how a building on a residential street in a major American city ended up with that single sentence as its entire official footprint. Now I've looked into this kind of thing enough to know it's not as rare as you'd think. There are hundreds of so-called dead addresses across the country, places that fell through the cracks of the administrative systems that are supposed to be continuously updated. Someone moves out, doesn't file the paperwork, a lease ends, and the name doesn't get changed. A building changes hands and formally cash, handshake, nothing recorded. And then the database just keeps ticking forward without that address in it. It's genuinely one of the quieter ways that bureaucracy fails, not with drama, not with a disaster or scandal, just with omission. A box that should have been checked wasn't, and decades go by. But this one stuck with me because of what happened when someone actually tried to fix it. Years after 1974, a person who said they'd moved into the building after 1978 went to file a new ownership record, and the system rejected it, said no prior occupancy, no tenant history, no phone number, no proof of residency, as though the building hadn't existed before that moment at all. The system didn't just fail to track the building, it had at some point essentially decided the building had never been there, like it had been pulled out of the ledger completely and the page had been left blank. And this is where it gets into territory I find genuinely fascinating, because it forces you to ask a real question. What makes something real in a practical sense, in a legal sense, in the sense of everyday modern life? Is it enough to physically exist, or do you have to exist in the record? Because this house physically existed, people walked past it, someone photographed it, a journalist wrote about it, but from the perspective of every official system that New Haven used to track property, it didn't exist. It had no owner, it had no history, it was invisible to the machinery of the city. And here's the thing about invisible places. They tend to attract their own kind of attention. A resident from the next street over apparently remembered visiting the house as a kid, told someone he saw a woman walking down the path one summer afternoon wearing a blue dress, no shoes, not on any camera, no photo, just a memory that stayed with him because the moment felt real and slightly wrong at the same time. And he never reported it, never followed up, because what would he even say? I saw someone at the house that doesn't officially exist. That sentence doesn't have anywhere to go. What I find most haunting about all of this isn't the building or the woman in the blue dress. It's the sentence the system used when someone tried to reclaim the address in 1978. No prior occupancy. Think about what that means. There is physical evidence, a photograph, a journalist's account, neighbors who remember it, that a building stood at that address. And the official response was that nothing was ever there. The record and reality had fully separated from each other, and when that happens, when the documentation goes one way and the physical world goes another, there's this weird space in between where things can exist without anyone being able to prove they do. You can't find 247 South Street on Google Maps anymore. No pin, no street view, just a gap. And I've been thinking about how many other gaps there are on maps and databases and tax records, little blank spots where something used to be counted and then stopped being counted. Not destroyed, not removed. Just forgotten, omitted. Left out of the list that everyone agrees is the list of real things. And those places don't go anywhere. They just stop being seen, which when you really think about it, might be the strangest thing that can happen to a place. And what I keep coming back to with places like 247 South Street is this idea of official documentation and how much weight we give it. We trust records, we trust the audit trail, we assume that if something ended up in a government file, somebody verified it, somebody checked. But the KU story, and this one is a real head scratcher, is about exactly the opposite. Something that was seen, captured on camera, clearly documented in an internal university report, and then buried so deep that it took 18 years for anyone to even find the note. A man no one can identify walking through an empty building 2 minutes before a fire started, and the official record just says electrical fault. Okay, so this one is the kind of thing that I genuinely do not know how to fully process. And I've spent a lot of time with it because on one hand, there are rational explanations you can try to apply. And on the other hand, when you line up all the actual documented facts, and these are documented facts, this isn't somebody's story, this is in an official university internal audit report, the rational explanations stop being satisfying pretty quickly. January 5th, 1967, Lawrence, Kansas, University of Kansas, North Hall, West Wing. It is 3 in the morning. There's a major winter storm tearing through the area, wind howling through the buildings, eave snow coming down hard. The kind of January night in the Midwest where you want to be inside and asleep. Everyone in the dorm should be exactly that. And then at 3:04 in the morning, a fire breaks out in the attic of the West Wing. Nobody inside, no students hurt. The fire department shows up within 5 minutes, finds scorched insulation and burned wiring in the attic, and files their report. Fire department log 6712, official cause, electrical fault originating near attic insulation. Clean, closed, done. And that would be the entire story, except it isn't. In 1985, 18 years later, a university safety officer is doing a routine audit of old incident logs, standard stuff, going back through years of records, looking for patterns, looking for things that might inform current safety policy. And buried on page 7 of this audit report, under a section titled Unverified Anomalies, is a note about what the security camera captured in the West Wing corridor 2 minutes and 18 seconds before the fire started. And what it captured was a man walking down the central hall of the dormitory at 3 in the morning, gray wool coat, alone. No entry point recorded on the security system. No exit point, no time-stamped access log, no student record matching the description. The system had no record of him entering the building. He simply appeared on camera in the middle of the corridor and then disappeared from frame. Now, I want to be really clear about what makes this so strange. It's not just the man, it's the gap between what the camera shows and what every other record shows. In 1967, university security wasn't what it is now. No key card readers, no digital logs, no facial recognition, but there were still protocols. Access to dormitory buildings at 3 in the morning, especially during a storm, was not just an open door. Someone walking through that corridor should have been logged somewhere, and there's nothing 18 years later. The safety officer who found this footage put it in the audit report under unverified anomalies, and then, as far as anyone can tell, nothing happened. No follow-up investigation, no effort to identify the figure, just a note on page 7 that somebody thought should probably be written down even if they didn't know what to do with it. And I find that decision, the decision to include it in an official document without pushing further, really interesting. Because that's a choice. You don't accidentally include something in an audit report. Whoever wrote that note made a conscious decision to say, I saw this, I can't explain it, I'm going to document it because I think it matters, but I'm also not going to make a thing of it because I don't know what kind of thing it is. And I think that's actually the most honest response to something genuinely inexplicable. Not screaming ghost, not pretending it didn't happen, just writing it down quietly on page 7 and moving on. The fire itself didn't kill anyone. That's worth saying clearly. No injuries, no students were in the West Wing that night, just burned insulation and cold air after the flames were out. But for years afterward, people at KU apparently talked about that. Not because of the fire. Fires happen, especially in old buildings with aging electrical systems, but because of what happened just before it. A retired professor I heard about years later said a classmate had told him he'd seen someone in that hallway that night, gray coat, just standing there, not moving, like he was waiting for something. He'd mentioned it at the time, and nobody had known what to do with it, so they'd all just kind of moved on. The building itself was torn down in 1989 to make room for new housing. Whatever physical evidence might have remained went with it. The wall outside with the old dormitory sign gone during renovation. There's no plaque, no historical marker, no mention in any official campus history, but somewhere, apparently there's a VHS tape. A retired security guard reportedly kept a copy of the original footage, said he didn't know why he kept it, just that it felt like someone needed to hold on to it because when institutions close cases and move on, someone needs to carry what didn't get resolved. What this story does to me, and I keep circling back to this, is make me think about how many things like this are sitting in filing cabinets and storage rooms right now in official documents that have been seen by maybe 3 people in the last 50 years. Things that were documented because someone thought they should be documented, but were never elevated because nobody knew how to elevate them without looking foolish. The gap between what we know happened and what we're willing to officially acknowledge is enormous, and it's not because of cover-ups or conspiracies. It's just because the systems we use to process reality have a very narrow definition of what counts as an acceptable explanation. Electrical fault, 2 words, that's what the 1967 fire at KU is, officially. 2 words that account for the scorched insulation and say absolutely nothing about the man in the gray coat who walked through the building 2 minutes before it started. But you know what connects the KU story to the next one for me? It's this idea of something being physically present in a place where, according to every official record, nothing should be there. The man in the gray coat had no business being in that building. And the next story is about a building that had no business existing at all, a house on a hillside outside Bellingham, Washington, built by people who left absolutely no trace of ever having existed. And with a single handwritten note inside that says everything you need to know about why that is. Okay, so I want you to picture something. You're on a dirt road outside Bellingham, Washington. Not a road that goes anywhere useful. Not a road on any map you'd pull up on your phone. Just a winding 2-track that pushes up through the woods toward a hillside. The kind of place where there's no logical reason for a road to be because there's nothing up there worth going to. And then you come around a bend, and there it is, a farmhouse, 1 story, 2 rooms. A single red door that's obviously made from salvaged wood, doesn't match anything else about the structure. Trees growing close on all sides, no porch, no garage, no visible water source, no road that connects to it directly. Just this house sitting on a steep clay hillside, like someone built it because they had to and not because it made any practical sense. Nobody has lived there since 1952, and nobody knows who built it. I went through the Bellingham County land records and the Washington State Archives, and here's what they show. In 1938, a deed was filed for this property listing the owner as the family of J.P. Hargrove. That's it. No first name on record, no address, no description of the family, just that phrase, the family of J.P. Hargrove. And when you go looking for J.P. Hargrove, or any Hargrove at all, in the census records from 1940 through 1960, within a 5-mile radius of that property, you find nothing. 0 matches, no household, no marriage records, no children enrolled in any local school, not in Bellingham, not in the surrounding towns. The family that this deed says owned this property does not appear to have existed in any official record from that era. The land itself doesn't make any sense as a homestead either. It's on a steep clay slope, not good for farming, no water access, trees growing too close for any practical agricultural use, no roads leading directly to the structure. There's no reason from a practical standpoint for anyone to have built a house on this particular piece of land. You'd have to really want to be there specifically to have chosen this spot, and whoever chose it left no explanation for why. And then in 1952, a county surveyor mapping out new roads near the property finds something inside the house, tucked into an old floor plan, a single sheet of paper, yellowed with 1 sentence written on it in pencil. Just this: we never moved out, no date, no signature, no name. That's all. And I keep coming back to that sentence because it does something to you. We never moved out. It's not asking for anything. It's not explaining anything. It's not a plea or a mystery or a warning. It's just a statement of fact left by someone who clearly understood that on paper, in every record that was supposed to track them, they didn't exist. And they were saying, that's fine. We know we're not in the record, but we were here. We never moved out. Don't confuse the absence of documentation with the absence of presence. There's a philosophical question buried in this that I think about a lot, which is, what is the relationship between existing and being documented? We live in an era where those two things have basically merged. If you're not in the database, you effectively don't exist. At least not in any way the systems care about. No credit history means you can't rent an apartment. No social security number means you can't work legally. No address means you can't vote, can't receive mail, can't access most government services. Documentation isn't just a record of existence, it basically is existence in a practical sense. But in rural Washington in the 1930s and 40s, that wasn't fully true yet. People could build things, live in places, exist in communities, and leave almost no paper trail if they chose to or if they didn't know they were supposed to. And this family, whoever they were, seems to have done exactly that. They built a house on a hillside and lived in it, and then at some point stopped living in it, and they left one sentence behind to prove they'd been there because they knew that was all the proof that would ever exist. The surveyor who found the note reportedly said he didn't know what to make of it, thought maybe someone had written it after a death in the family or after a divorce or during some kind of breakdown, but there are no records of any such event. No death notices in the area, no court filings, no church records, no mention in any county document of the Hargrove family at all before or after. The note is, in some very real sense, the only evidence that anyone was ever in that house. And the house is still there. That red door, unmarked, standing in the rain on that hillside, not locked from what I understand, not boarded up, not maintained by anyone, just standing in the woods outside Bellingham with a deed attached to a family that left no other trace and a handwritten sentence on a piece of paper that has outlasted everything and everyone connected to it. There's something about that, the fact that it still stands, that it hasn't been absorbed into some other property or torn down or reclaimed, that suggests the administrative systems around it have also just kind of looked at it and moved on. Nobody wants to deal with the paperwork on a property whose owner doesn't exist. So it just sits there, unclaimed, undocumented. Exactly the way the people who built it apparently preferred it. That house in Bellingham and what it represents, this idea of existing completely outside the official record, of having a presence that can't be verified or tracked, leads me directly to the next story, because if the Hargrove family represents one kind of invisible existence, the next story is about someone trying to reach a kind of invisible existence, trying to send a letter to a place that has stopped existing on any map. And what happened to that letter is one of the strangest and most achingly human things I've come across. All right, so this one isn't about a ghost, and it isn't about a meek kind of official malfunction or bureaucratic mystery. It's about grief. I think it's fundamentally about grief and what people do with it when they have nowhere left to direct it. And the reason it ended up in the historical record at all is pure chance, or at least what looks like chance. The whole thing still kind of floors me. January 5th, 1972, El Reno, Oklahoma, early morning, frost still sitting heavy on the fields, and the phone rings at the local post office. A woman on the line, no name ever recorded, nothing in any log that would tell you who she was, asks to have a letter delivered to an address that no longer exists, not a real street address, map coordinates, old Route 30 discontinued, a road that the state officially pulled from all maps in 1968. Gone, eroded, buried under new highway plans, functionally non-existent. There's nothing there, no house, no barn, no mailbox, just a patch of flat land with some broken concrete posts where something used to be. The clerk doesn't push back, doesn't ask for verification or a sender's name or a return address, just takes it down. Says they'll send it. And they do the following day, January 6, 1972. The letter is delivered to coordinates marked former Route 30, Section 4B, to an empty lot, to nothing. There's no recipient. There's no mailbox. The letter just goes out there and lands in a place where nobody is going to pick it up. And then 5 years pass. 1977, a man named Ray Cobb is cleaning out a trash bin behind a hardware store in El Reno after a storm, just sorting through debris, broken glass, old receipts, torn paper, the kind of stuff that accumulates in outdoor bins over years of use. And he finds an envelope folded. No stamp, no return address, the ink faded to a pale blue. And on the front, in that faded ink, one line to the person who never came home. That's it. No name inside, no date, no signature, just those words. Cobb took it to the post office, which logged it as unclaimed mail and filed it under miscellaneous no return address, found 1977. And there it stayed. The Oklahoma State Historical Society eventually got hold of it, and it's been in their archives ever since, listed exactly as the post office logged it. Unclaimed mail El Reno, found in 1977. No one has ever come forward to claim it. No one has ever identified the woman who made that phone call in January of 1972. The letter is just there in an archive box with nothing attached to it except a question. And here's where I want to slow down and really sit with this, because I think people move past the emotional weight of it too fast. Somebody wrote that a real person with a pen wrote to the person who never came home on an envelope, and then they called a post office and gave them coordinates for a road that doesn't exist anymore, because that was where the letter needed to go. Not to a current address, to a place that used to exist, to somewhere that only exists now in memory. What do you do with that? What are the circumstances in which a person does that? You don't send a letter to a defunct road as a prank. You don't do it casually. You do it because you've run out of other options. Because the person you're trying to reach isn't reachable in any of the normal ways, and maybe they never were. And the closest thing you have to an address for them is a set of coordinates on a road that the state has officially erased from its maps, and you still try, you still make the call and give the coordinates and say, please send this. I've thought a lot about who this letter might have been for a brother who left years before and never wrote back, a father who disappeared during some earlier decade when disappearing was easier to do, a daughter who was supposed to come home from somewhere and didn't, someone who died in a place that no longer has an address. We don't know. We can't know. The system logged the delivery but didn't ask why. The system, to its credit, just did what it was asked to do. It tried to get that letter where the woman said it needed to go. It put it out there in the landscape where old Route 30 used to be. And then the wind moved it, or the rain moved it, or some chain of completely mundane events moved it from an empty field in 1972 to a trash bin in 1977, where Ray Cobb found it while cleaning up after a storm. And he said apparently, according to the record, that when he read those words, it felt like something he'd been waiting to hear, which is either the most poetic coincidence imaginable or something that doesn't really have a clean, rational explanation, and I'm honestly comfortable with either answer. What I find most moving about this story is the commitment behind it, not the mystery of where the letter went or how it ended up in Cobb's trash pile. The commitment of the woman who made the call. She knew that address was defunct. She knew there was no mailbox there, no one to receive it, no way that a letter could realistically reach anyone at those coordinates, and she sent it anyway. Because the alternative was not sending it, and not sending it apparently wasn't something she could live with. The letter sits in an archive in Oklahoma, unclaimed since 1977, nobody's name on it except the person who never came home, whoever that was. And the post office did its job. It tried to deliver it, which is all any of us can really do when we're trying to reach someone who's no longer where we expect them to be. Something about that story, the idea of a machine, a system, just quietly doing what it was built to do, even in the most unusual circumstances, connects directly to the next thing I want to tell you about. Because in Pocatello, Idaho in 1932, there was a clock that did something very similar. It kept running when it had no business running. And the man who was there to witness it described it in a way that I've never been able to shake. All right, I need you to understand the context here, because context is everything with this story. We're in 1932. The Great Depression is fully underway. People are struggling in ways that are genuinely hard to imagine. Now, infrastructure across the country is a patchwork. Some places have reliable electricity. Some places are still on generators. Some places have nothing. In a town like Pocatello, Idaho, a public clock that runs on electricity, a brass electric clock mounted in the courthouse, that's actually a point of civic pride. It means the town is modern. It means things work. The clock keeps time and everyone can trust it. That matters more than it probably sounds. And then one January afternoon in 1932, the lights go out. Not a flicker, not a slow fade, total instantaneous blackout. Every home, every store, the train station, everything in Pocatello goes dark at once. A winter storm is hammering the area, which is the obvious explanation, and in 1932, power infrastructure was nowhere near as resilient as it is now. So a storm knocking out a city's power grid wasn't shocking, but this one lasted 3 hours of complete darkness in January in Idaho. And in those conditions, that is genuinely dangerous. People are lighting candles and burning wood and trying to figure out what's happening. Now, here's where it gets strange inside the courthouse. That brass electric clock on the wall above the main hall, it stops at exactly 3:17 p.m., which makes sense. Power's out, clock stops, fine, except 2 minutes later, with power still out and no external signal of any kind, the clock starts again on its own. Continues keeping time from exactly where it left off, as if the 2-minute gap hadn't happened at all. Not a reset, not a jump, just a clean, precise continuation, like someone had pressed pause and then play. I found this in the Pocatello Daily News from January of 1932, Idaho State Archives. This is a real newspaper, a real article, buried under a weather report about the storm, and in it, the night watchman at the courthouse, a man named Henry Payne, is quoted. And what he says is extraordinary. He says he manually cut the generator just before 3:17. Not because of the blackout, not because something failed, because he felt something, a vibration in the wires, a hum that he said wasn't supposed to be there, a change in the air that he described as feeling like, and I love this quote, like the wires themselves had stopped breathing. He felt it in his hands, apparently. This man who worked with that electrical system every day, who knew the rhythm of it, felt it change. And he cut the power not out of procedure, out of instinct. And then 2 minutes later, he turned it back on. And the clock resumed, and it kept perfect time, and Payne's explanation for why he turned it back on when he did was that the clock had already told him when to go again. I don't know exactly what to do with that sentence, but I don't want to dismiss it either, because here's a man who worked closely with the system every single day, not an engineer, not a physicist, just a night watchman who paid attention. And he's describing something that I think we've almost entirely lost in modern life, which is attunement to the machines we work with. We've built systems now that tell us when something is wrong, dashboards, alerts, diagnostics, warning lights. We don't have to feel anything anymore. We just wait for a notification. But Henry Payne had no notification system. He had his hands on the equipment and decades of familiarity with how it sounded and hummed and vibrated. And on January afternoon in 1932, it felt different, and he responded to that. What I can't explain mechanically is the precision. The clock stopped at 3:17 and restarted at 3:19, exactly 2 minutes. No jump, no adjustment, no need to reset or recalibrate. It just picked up from where it left off. Now there are possible explanations: residual current, capacitive storage, some kind of battery function that nobody documented, but none of them account for the precision of the timing or the fact that when the maintenance team checked everything afterward, they found no technical explanation for the event. No short circuit, no blown fuse, no transformer failure. The system worked perfectly after the blackout. Everything was fine, except for this 2-minute window where something happened that nobody could account for. And I think what really moves me about this story, beyond the mystery of it, is the image of Henry Payne standing in a dark courthouse during a blizzard, hand on the generator, feeling something that he can't name but trusts anyway, and acting on it. That level of intuitive relationship with the machine is something we don't cultivate anymore. We train people to read manuals and follow procedures and respond to alerts. We don't train people to feel. And Payne felt something shift in the wires, acted on that feeling, and whatever happened next, whether it was purely mechanical or something stranger, it produced a 2-minute pause in the official keeping of time in Pocatello, Idaho. Documented in a local newspaper, preserved in an archive, a moment when a man and a clock both seemed to be listening to something that nobody else could hear. The broader power outage was restored after 3 hours. Life resumed. The clock kept running. No further incidents were reported, but that window, 3:17 to 3:19, 2 minutes on a January afternoon in a courthouse in Idaho, remains unexplained. Not just in the informal sense of nobody ever got around to looking into it, unexplained in the official sense because the people who did look into it found nothing wrong with the system, nothing that could account for what Henry Payne saw and felt and responded to. It just happened. And the newspaper noted it, and then the world moved on. There's something about that courthouse clock story that keeps looping back to this idea of a transaction existing in official records that doesn't have a person behind it. Like the system just accepted what was presented to it without asking the questions it should have asked, and the story out of Iowa County in 1965 is the most literal version of that I've ever found. A deed signed, stamped, and filed, completely legitimate by the legal standards of the time, transferring an actual piece of property to a buyer who, as far as anyone has ever been able to determine, simply does not exist. Okay, so I want to walk through this slowly because the details really matter here, and I think if you rush through it, it sounds like a legal technicality and not the genuinely bizarre thing that it actually is. Because on the surface, yes, this is a story about a property deed. But when you dig into what that deed represents and what it means that it's still sitting in a county registry in Iowa, unchanged after 60 years, it becomes something much stranger than a paperwork error. October 3rd, 1965, Iowa County, Iowa. There's an old 2-room farmhouse just north of an old rail line, the kind of place that barely registers when you drive past it. Weathered wood, a porch that lists slightly to one side, the kind of structure that looks like it's been slowly surrendering to the landscape for decades. And the man who's lived there for over 40 years, a 72-year-old named Elias Thompson, who worked the local sawmill and raised hogs his whole life, decides to sell. He goes to the Iowa County Clerk's office, brings a deed, signs it over. The transaction is recorded and stamped, deed registry number 65-182, all the paperwork is in order, and the buyer is listed as John Doe, no address, no identification, no phone number. Nothing. Just the name John Doe. And the clerk stamps it, files it done. Now I want you to really sit with how insane this is. By today's standards, you cannot do this now. You cannot transfer real property to John Doe. The entire apparatus of modern property law, title companies, notarization requirements, identity verification, tax ID numbers exist precisely to prevent anonymous transactions like this. The system has been specifically designed to close this loophole. But in 1965, Iowa, apparently nobody at the county clerk's office looked at the name John Doe and thought to ask a follow-up question. They had a signed deed, they filed it, the transfer was complete. And then John Doe never showed up. Not in 1965, not the following year, not at any point in the subsequent decades. In 2018, 53 years after the transaction, investigators ran John Doe through every database available, every one, DMV records, voter rolls, property tax records, school district files, social security numbers, birth certificates going back through the relevant decades, and they found absolutely nothing. Not a single record in any system that corresponds to a John Doe who purchased a farmhouse in Iowa County in 1965. No human being who appears to have existed ever as the buyer of this property. And yet, the deed stands, it's still in the registry, still legally valid, the title has never been changed, the house is never sold again, because officially it is already owned by a person who, according to every record that's supposed to track the existence of people in this country, does not exist. I talked to someone who had tried to get the county clerk's office to explain this, and they had asked whether anyone had ever tried to trace John Doe, and the clerk said yes, they'd run checks, and nothing came up. And then she said this, which I find genuinely extraordinary, but we don't have a system for people who don't exist anymore. And I think what she meant was people who don't exist in the record, people who have no paper trail, no digital footprint, no confirmation of identity in any database. But the phrase, as she said it, is this incredible accidental aperture into what makes this situation so philosophically strange. We have built a world where documentation and existence have become almost synonymous. And this property deed is a case where the transaction was legally valid, but the person on one end of it is invisible to every system we use to confirm that people are real. So the house sits, nobody maintains it, the roof leaks and the porch is close to collapse, but it doesn't go to auction. It doesn't get seized by the county for unpaid taxes because somehow, and I've never gotten a satisfying explanation for this part, the tax situation has also existed in this strange suspended state. It's not the taxes are being paid. It's that the whole property has fallen into a kind of administrative limbo that nobody seems willing to resolve, because to resolve it, someone would have to officially acknowledge that the buyer named on the deed doesn't exist, and then make a formal legal determination about what happens to a property when its owner has no provable existence. That is not a simple process. And apparently nobody in Iowa County has wanted to be the one to open that can of worms. When I think about who John Doe actually was, and there's a real possibility that this was simply a person using a pseudonym or a placeholder name used to complete a transaction quickly without the full paperwork, or even just a mistake by Thompson or the clerk, what strikes me is that it doesn't really matter. Whatever the original intent, the result is the same. A farmhouse in Iowa County was legally sold 60 years ago to a name with no person behind it. The system accepted the transaction, the system stamped the deed, and the system has never been able to undo it because it was never designed to handle the possibility that a buyer could be legally real and personally invisible at the same time. I held a photocopy of that deed once, yellowed paper, the ink faded, but still readable. Elias Thompson's signature and the typed name beneath it, John Doe. And there's something about looking at that piece of paper, this ordinary legal document produced in an ordinary county office on an ordinary Tuesday in 1965, and knowing that it represents the total collapse of the assumption that all transactions have real, traceable people on both ends. Just one transaction, one deed, and the assumption fell right through. The John Doe story is about a system that accepted something it should have questioned and then couldn't undo the acceptance. But the Mount Vernon story is almost the opposite. It's about a system that did something nobody authorized on a day when nobody was there, and the evidence of it is sitting in an official incident report, a school bell that rang itself in an empty building, in a snowstorm, and a senior administrator who wrote it down and filed it and never explained it. Okay, so December 18th, 1991, Mount Vernon, New York. A serious snowstorm has come through and completely shut the school district down. No staff, no teachers, no janitors, no one scheduled to be on campus. Roads are blocked. Power is doing that thing it does during bad northeastern winter storms where it goes out and flickers and goes out again. The district sent everyone home. The schools are locked and empty, and the whole point is that nobody is there. And at exactly 3 being in the afternoon, the official end of school day time, the school bell rings throughout the entire building via the intercom system, one clear chime, the same sound that rings every day at 3:20 to send the kids home, except the school was closed. There were no kids. There was nobody there to send anywhere, and there was, according to every piece of documentation, nobody there to press the button. I want to tell you about that button because it matters a lot to this story in 1991. This wasn't a digital system. There was no automated schedule running on a server somewhere. There was no smart clock connected to a bell sequence that fired at preset times. The bell at this school was manually operated, a physical switch in the main office that a teacher or administrator pressed at 3 p.m. to trigger the chime. That was the system. Human hand, physical switch, bell rings. No human hand meant no bell. It was about as simple as a system could be. And yet, the bell rang. Incident report number 91047, filed January 1992 with the Mount Vernon Central School District, written by Harold Kessler, a senior administrator who had been with the district for over 30 years, and in the language that administrators use when they are trying to describe something that happened without acknowledging that they can't explain it. It says at approximately 3 p.m. on December 18, 1991, the school bell sounded throughout the facility via intercom system, despite no personnel being present in any building at that time. And then in a line I keep coming back to, Kessler added, "No one can reproduce the sound. No one has ever turned on the bell manually. No one can reproduce it." That is an administrator saying very carefully that they looked at this from every angle they could think of and couldn't make it make sense. Not we investigated and found no cause. We cannot reproduce it, which implies they tried. Which implies that at some point after filing this report, someone went back to that intercom system and stood in front of the switch and tried to figure out under what circumstances a bell could ring without a hand on the switch and could. Now, I've thought a lot about the most rational possible explanation here, which is some version of a hidden automated backup. The idea that buried somewhere in the wiring of the intercom system installed at some point before 1987, when the system was last updated, there was a circuit, maybe a failsafe, maybe a testing loop, that could trigger the bell under specific electrical conditions. And that when the power surged or fluctuated during the storm, that circuit activated. That's plausible. Electrical systems do weird things when power conditions are unstable. And old systems especially can behave unexpectedly because the people who installed them may have added components that weren't fully documented. But here's the problem with that explanation. Kessler and whoever helped him investigate had access to every piece of documentation for that intercom system, every maintenance record, every modification log since installation, and they found no record of any backup circuit or automated sequence. The system, as documented, had no mechanism for self-triggering. And the reason that matters isn't just that it rules out the explanation, it's that it means if that circuit existed, nobody ever wrote it down. And if nobody ever wrote it down, we're back in the same territory as several of these other stories. Something real happening that the official record doesn't have a category for. AA teacher named Lane Rostow was driving past the school that afternoon and heard the bell. She'd apparently pulled over because she thought it meant someone was inside and something might be wrong. Walked up to the building, looked through windows, saw nothing. Nobody. She stood there in the snow listening to the echo of that chime and then got back in her car. There's also the detail about a student named Marcus Tennyson who was apparently found in a classroom that day under circumstances that the report is vague about, who said when a teacher asked him about it, "I woke up, it just happened. Like, my body woke up at 3:00. I genuinely don't know what to make of that." Maybe it's nothing. Maybe this kid always woke up from naps at 3:00 or happened to be alert at that moment for completely unrelated reasons. But in the context of everything else, it's a detail that sticks. What I keep coming back to, though, is Harold Kessler sitting in his office in January of 1992 writing that incident report. This is a man who's been in education administration for 30 years. He has filled out thousands of forms. He knows what an incident report is for. It's to document something so that the institution has a record of it, so that there's accountability, so that patterns can be identified. And he's writing one about a bell that rang by itself in an empty building during a snowstorm. He can't explain it. He says as much in the report, but he still writes it up, still files it, because it happened. And the thing you do when something happens is write it down, even if you don't know what it means. So that's institutional integrity. In a weird way, most people faced with something that inexplicable would find a way not to document it. Write it off as a system glitch. Don't make a report, because a report creates a record, and a record invites questions, and questions you can't answer make you look like you don't know what you're doing. Kessler filed the report anyway. And now, 30 plus years later, it's in the archive. One time in an empty building on a snowy December afternoon in 1991, officially documented, officially unexplained, just sitting there in a filing cabinet in New York. And what strikes me about the Mount Vernon story, this idea of something in a building doing what it was built to do, even when no one authorized it, connects in a really interesting way to the final story I want to tell you. Because in Fort Smith, Arkansas in 1956, something in a building did something that nobody authorized, and what it left behind was a single piece of paper that had no business existing where it was found, and no business having been dated the way it was dated, and the system responded to it. The only way it knew how, it burned it. All right, so this is the last one, and I want to take my time with it because I think it's the most layered of all of them. It's not just one strange thing. It's a series of things that each have a possible rational explanation, and then when you stack them all together, the rational explanations start to feel like they're working too hard. Fort Smith, Arkansas, January 10th, 1956, the main post office, which has been operating since it was built in 1908, routine inspection of the storage room, the kind of thing that happens periodically, someone going through to check inventory, log what's there, make sure the physical space is in order, standard stuff, nothing unusual expected. And then they find a piece of paper that's burned. Not there was a fire and some paper got charred in the process. There was no fire. The room showed no signs of fire, no smoke damage, no scorching on any surface, no smell of combustion, no elevated temperature on any instrument. Everything in the storage room was normal, except this one piece of paper, which was curled at the edges and blackened in a way that the subsequent fire department inspection described as consistent with heat applied from within rather than from an external source, meaning it looked to the people examining it like it had been heated from the inside out, not touched by flame-generated heat. And on the surviving portion of the paper, legible through the char, final delivery, November 3, 1942. Now, the Fort Smith post office was built in 1908. The formal question is whether a document bearing a 1942 date is inherently strange in a 1956 storage room. And the answer is no, obviously not. A 14-year-old document in a post office archive is completely normal. But here's what's not normal. The paper itself, not the text, the physical paper, was carbon dated by a laboratory in Little Rock using analysis that was later applied to documents from the relevant archival period, and the dating came back significantly older than 1942. Not off by a year or two. The physical material of the paper predated not just the 1942 date printed on it, but the building the paper was found in, a document bearing a 1942 date written on paper that is physically older than the building where it was stored, that spontaneously generated heat and burned from the inside in a room with no ignition source. Those are the three things you have to hold simultaneously. And I'll say again, official report, file number 5613, Arkansas Historical Commission. This is documented. The fire department's conclusion was spontaneous combustion due to static electricity. And I want to take that seriously for a moment because it's not a crazy explanation. Spontaneous combustion in paper storage rooms is a real phenomenon. Dry air paper accumulation, static buildup under the right conditions, especially in winter when humidity is low. Paper can catch fire without an external spark. It happens. Not often, but it happens. Except static electricity doesn't choose one piece of paper out of a room full of paper. That's not how static buildup and discharge works. If there was enough static in that room to ignite paper, you'd expect more widespread effects, at minimum multiple sheets affected. The fire department found one burned piece of paper, in a room that was otherwise completely undamaged, and the piece they found happened to be the one with the anomalous dating. I've spent time trying to construct a completely mundane explanation for how that paper got there. The most plausible one I can build goes something like this. In the early 20th century, the Postal Service frequently consolidated storage from multiple facilities when locations closed or merged. Old documents from various offices would end up boxed together and shipped to central storage. It's entirely possible, genuinely possible, that a piece of paper from a much earlier era, which had been sitting in some other postal facility since before 1908, ended up in Fort Smith storage through a series of consolidations. Nobody would have known it was old. Nobody would have checked. And then a 1942 date could have been stamped or written on it at some point to bring it into an active inventory system without anyone verifying the physical age of the paper itself. So that's the most rational path I can build. And it explains the presence of old paper in the storage room. What it doesn't explain is why that specific piece of paper burned in a room full of paper, some of it presumably also old. Why did the heat event, if that's what it was, happen to this one sheet? And I think that's where you reach the point where rational explanation and satisfying explanation stop being the same thing. The rational explanation is static electricity acting on one piece of paper in a storage room in Arkansas in January. I accept that this is possible. What I can't fully accept is that it's sufficient. Because the specificity of it, the fact that it was this paper with this date predating this building that generated heat and burned while everything around it stayed intact, that specificity demands more than static electricity covers. The post office in Fort Smith still exists. The storage room from 1956 is long gone, absorbed into decades of renovation and modification. Whatever was in that room, whatever accumulated history and misrouted mail and improperly cataloged documents is gone with it, except for the burn mark in the record, file 56-13. One piece of paper that heated from within and left behind a date that shouldn't have been there in a building that hadn't existed yet when something apparently was first delivered to it. I think about the systems we build and what they actually hold. We think of a post office as infrastructure, a mechanism for moving paper from one place to another, but a post office is also a kind of archive. It holds mail and transit mail that couldn't be delivered, mail that got rerouted, dead letters, lost packages, things that were sent and never received. The postal system has been running continuously in this country for over 200 years, and it has moved, by some estimates, hundreds of billions of pieces of paper. And not all of it got where it was going. Some of it has been sitting somewhere in a storage room in Fort Smith or a dead mail facility in Atlanta or a filing cabinet in a building that's since been demolished, just waiting. And maybe sometimes under the right conditions on a dry January day in 1956, when the static in the room is exactly what it needs to be, something that's been waiting long enough finally does what it was always going to do, announces itself, leaves a mark, says, I was here, I was real, and I had somewhere to be, and then burns.